Our first scripture lesson that we heard read this evening was really this interesting lesson. During this about 3,000 years ago is when this takes place. Elijah is the prophet of Yahweh in Israel. And yet Ahab marries a Phoenician queen from another land for a political alliance. And Jezebel brings in her prophets because she worships a god named Baal, which was a god of fertility and a god of rain and a god of storms. Jezebel started killing the prophets of Yahweh. And so Elijah says it's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain again. I want you to think about that kind of power. I mean, we're an agrarian society. If we knew that one person says it ain't going to rain until I say it rains, how do you think our leaders would take to that? Well, Elijah disappeared. Ahab sent messengers and soldiers out looking for Elijah everywhere. In fact, they made other kings and other surrounding areas swear oaths that they were not hiding Elijah because he was the most wanted man in all of Israel. This time, this was the northern kingdom of Israel before David unifies Judah with Israel. But at the appointed time, Elijah comes out. In fact, he runs into Obadiah, who is one of the servants, right-hand men of King Ahab. And in fact, when Obadiah sees him, he's like, he doesn't want to leave because he knows how important it is that they find him and how important it is to the survival of the kingdom and feeding their people that rain is restored. And he goes, I promise you I will stay right here. Go get Ahab. I will meet him here. So he goes and gets Ahab and fearfully. And Ahab comes and very distraught, very upset, wanting to put the end to this. So Elijah says, go gather all the prophets of Baal. We're going to meet on Mount Carmel, which is a mountain that overlooks the Mediterranean Sea, but also is a high point in the northern kingdom of Israel. And so they gather up on Mount Carmel. And Elijah says, all right, build an altar. We're both going to build 2 altars. We're going to take 2 bulls. We're going to kill them. We're going to cut the pieces. We're going to lay them on firewood. And I'm going to let you go first. All you have to do is get your God to light the fire. So we've heard this story before. So they start praying. And there's no fire. Now Elijah wasn't just taking this calmly. He was heckling. Shout a little louder. Maybe he's asleep and needs to be woken up. This goes on for hours and hours. And yet Baal, the god of fire and the god of storms and the god of fertility, does nothing to light the fire. And so Elijah, he doesn't just leave well enough alone. He says, here, give me a shovel. And he digs a trench around his altar. And he says, bring me 3 buckets of water. And they bring him 3 buckets of water. And he starts pouring water over his wood. And he goes, bring me some more water. And he keeps doing this until water has filled the trench and everything is saturated. This ain't going to light. And then he raises his head to heaven. And he prays. And it says that a fireball falls from heaven and consumes not just his altar, but both altars, just almost like incinerates them. After this, the false prophets of Baal that couldn't be delivered were put to death. After this, Elijah gets on the ground and he prays. And they watch a cloud out over the sea start to grow. And it starts to darken. And it starts to build. I want you just to picture this in your mind. In fact, he says, Ahab, it's time to get in your chariot and ride home quickly before the rain starts. And the rain starts. When Elijah says the rain is going to start. Elijah follows and he waits outside of the gate. And I just want you to think about what this must look like, this victory, this power, this spectacular display of God's power. And then we get to the lesson that we read tonight. Jezebel says, I swear on my own life that you're going to be dead by this time tomorrow. And Elijah runs. You know, he went from this great high that nothing could stop him to this great low, and he goes, and we're going to hear what he says. Elijah had just stood on Mount Carmel in a spectacular spiritual moment in Scripture. This public showdown, a miracle no one could deny. If faith were measured by power, Elijah was untouchable. But faith is rarely sustained by spectacle. A single whispered threat from Queen Jezebel undoes him. The prophet who commands the rain and face-down king and false prophets now runs alone into the wilderness. No applause, no crowd, just heat and dust and fear. He walks until his strength collapses. He falls beneath a desert broom tree, a scraggly patch of shade in a barren land, and prays one of the most human prayers in the Bible. It is enough, Lord. Take my life. There is no poetry. There's no theology, just exhaustion, and God's response is not a correction. God lets him sleep. God wakes him gently, feeds him warm bread, and lets him sleep again. Sometimes the most spiritual experience is rest. 40 days later, Elijah reaches Mount Horeb, which is Mount Sinai, where Moses once encountered thunder and divine fire. If anywhere should produce fireworks, it is here. We heard the text tonight. A violent wind tears the mountainside apart, but the Lord is not in the wind. The ground shakes in an earthquake, but the Lord is not in the earthquake. Fire flashes across the sky, but the Lord is not in the fire. Then comes what Hebrew calls Kol Damama Daka, the sound of sheer silence. And Elijah covers his face because the God he expected in spectacle arrives in nearness. The God of Sinai's thunder is also the God who meets us in the quiet.